I think just the openness to there being realities behind what we can see, invisible realities behind what we can see physically, it opens up this whole new realm for us.
Though much has changed in religious practice over the centuries, the defining Christian celebration, the Mass, remains the same. From the preaching of the Word to the Eucharistic sacrifice, Christians continue to encounter Jesus in this sacrament of sacraments. Reflecting on this familiar yet transcendent mystery, novelist and spiritual writer Paula Huston shares an informative and contemporary perspective. So come along on One Ordinary Sunday, a meditation on the mystery of the Mass, today on Subject Matters. Paula, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Now, you preface your book with your own conversion story, especially the role of the Eucharist and the Mass in your own conversion. And that's very powerful, and it's also very valuable to a lot of Catholics who are cradle Catholics, sometimes even maybe take the Mass for granted because we've been there so many times. But let's start there. Tell us about your conversion to Catholicism, what eventually led you to write this meditation.
Well, I grew up Lutheran, and I was a very dedicated Lutheran child, all the way up through midway through high school. And when I was 17, the pastor at my Lutheran church asked if I would be interested and willing to go on a medical mission to Honduras. And I spent a summer living in a village in Honduras with another high school girl, and we were giving shots and offering kind of minimal medical care to people. And it was the first time I'd been exposed to real suffering, and clearly among innocent people who hadn't asked for it or deserved it. And at that point, I just kind of quietly let go of faith that was really, I couldn't answer the question, why would God allow innocent suffering? And I came home and I kept going to church because, church did good things, and it was the late 60s and our church was very socially active. So it took some years for me to stop going. But when I did, I was away for almost 20 years. And it was finally going back to school to finish my degree in my mid-30s, late 30s, that I took an Introduction to Ethics course and met Plato for the first time. And all of a sudden I had, I guess it would amount to a moral conversion experience. I started looking at myself and the way I had been living my life through kind of a brand new lens for the first time. Well, it turned out that professor was a secret Christian, not a Catholic. He'd been raised Baptist, but his wife was a devout Catholic. And he sort of helped me through those hard questions that I'd had from the time I was 17, helped me by pointing me to great books to read, things like that, introduced me to C.S. Lewis, and then introduced me to Janet, his wife, who took me up to a monastery on the Big Sur coast, Roman Catholic monks and priests, a contemplative hermitage that is Benedictine at its root. And that just totally blew me away. I mean, I had never even talked to a priest before, much less seen a monk, and here were these guys with their white robes, and all of them were pretty much my age. They all seemed like perfectly normal people who could be out in the world and being successful, and yet they had chosen this life which was anonymous. They had taken a vow of stability. They would stay out here in this wilderness hermitage. They just really affected me deeply, and that was kind of the beginning of my path into Catholicism. And I began going to the old mission in San Luis Obispo, California, where I was living. And for a long time, just being on the outside watching, nervous that someone might kick me out because I didn't belong and didn't understand what was going on. But slowly I began to see that people were smiling at me, and I suspected they might even be praying for me because they could tell I was undergoing some kind of spiritual crisis. And it just evolved in that way.
Tell me a little bit about the book, especially the format of the book. Situate us there. It's the 14th Sunday of Ordinary Time, so the beginning of July, and you begin with us this meditation on the Mass. Tell me a little bit about the format.
Yeah, it seemed to me that one thing that took a long time for me to get as a new Catholic was the fact that this is a very structured thing. I mean, I'd go in every day and I would see this is beginning to feel familiar, but I started looking at, what is it that makes this coherent? And it is that two-part setup of the liturgy of the Word, moving in right into the liturgy of the sacrament, or liturgy of the Eucharist. And so that's how I split the book, only I called it The Story and the Sacrament. Because in that first half, we're really looking at the history of the whole thing, beginning with the Old Testament, this deep root in Judaism, the chosen people, and how so many things foreshadow what's going to take place with the coming of Christ. And that shows up in the readings of that part of the Mass in the liturgy. And that fascinated me.
It fascinates me too. When I was reading your book, listening to you reflect on how ancient some of these practices are. We know that our Jewish brothers and sisters also read scriptures when they go to synagogue and this kind of, but these are things that were happening 2,000 years ago. They're practices that the Church has been doing for a really long time, and I bet there's Catholics that go to church on Sunday and don't even think that this has been going on this long,
Well, there's so many symbols right there in the church. For instance, the little tabernacle where we put the already blessed hosts. That's straight out of, time of Moses when they built the original tabernacle. And there are little touches of that all through a Catholic church. But, I mean, when you say ancient, you really could talk about going back 3,000 years, because we're going back to the time of the temple.
Yeah.
And some of these prayers and things that we're saying are coming straight out of that.
Do you remember the first time that you went to Mass?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do.
Can you tell us about, or because you went to Mass a number of times before you actually entered the Catholic Church, obviously,
I did.
Right? So maybe tell us about the first time you went to Mass once you were received into the Catholic Church. What do you
remember? Once I was
from
received
that?
into the Catholic Church, okay. Oh, wow, it was a long haul to get there, because I had to, I began RCIA, finally made the decision to do it, knowing that my Lutheran relatives would possibly be rolling in their graves, so it was I remember bursting into tears the day I made the decision to sign up for RCIA, because it seemed like such a momentous thing to do. And then I got into the RCIA classes, and they asked some simple questions, but one of them was about whether I'd been married before. And that started me on it took about 2 years for the annulment to go through, and it was a difficult experience, and actually proved to be a huge blessing. It forced me to go back and look at things I didn't want to look at, decisions I had made. So when I finally was able to partake, it was just, it was a huge and exciting day for me. And recently I was invited to a Mass where a 93-year-old man was becoming Catholic. And they decided to let him skip some of RCIA and go ahead and become a Catholic because they were nervous he wasn't going to make it. And he stood up there with tears coming, and I knew exactly how he was feeling. It's not an easy church to join in a lot of ways. It isn't, you know. There's some real, I think, some barriers that are in place there that make it a little difficult, but it was worth it.
Well, we have to take a short break, but when we come back, more with Paula Huston. We'll look at some of the particulars, some of the rituals, some of the symbols that we celebrate every Sunday during the Mass. Stay with us. Paula Huston is the author of 2 novels and 7 works of spiritual nonfiction. Her short stories and essays have appeared in numerous literary journals and magazines. A former writing and literature teacher in the California State University system, she currently mentors graduate students in creative nonfiction. A wife, mother, and grandmother, she's also an oblate, or vowed lay member, of a Camaldolese Benedictine monastic community in Big Sur, California.
As for me and my Wordsworth-inspired breakdown in that long-ago literature class, it was only when I participated in my first Eucharist that I understood the nature of the painful interior lacuna that had triggered all those tears. I'd been longing for something I could not even name, for outside the church there was no one who could name it for me. I'd been longing without knowing it for the great sacrament itself. I'd been longing to partake of the body and blood of Christ.
We're back with Paula Huston discussing her book, One Ordinary Sunday, a meditation on the mystery of the Mass. And Paula, there's a theme that runs through the book as you're reflecting on the different elements of the Mass that's quite difficult to talk about, which is death and loss, this feeling of loss. Why did you weave that into this reflection on the Mass? I mean, why do you see the connection, or what connection do you see there between the reality of loss in life and the celebration of the Mass as a Catholic Christian?
Well, probably, one of the things that struck me the most about coming into a Catholic church for the first time just was the crucifix, the image of this tortured body on the cross. And, that's puzzling for outsiders, because the churches I was used to, the cross is empty as a sign of triumph of Christ over death. But to me, it kind of struck right where I lived, because I was already beginning that process that seems to speed up the older we get, of handling the grief of losing people that I loved. I was about 40 the first time, that I came into a Catholic church, and I had just lost my dad, who was too young. He was in his 60s, and it was a big loss because we were very close. And so I think what I trusted right from the beginning, the Catholic view about the human condition, which is that if we're willing to choose life, which is what Moses says on Moab to the Israelites, I put before you the choice between life and death, blessing or curse. Choose life. And I think if we choose to live, that means we're choosing to love. And if we're choosing to love, then we're also choosing to take on the burden of suffering, because we're going to go through this kind of deep loss. And these losses have accelerated the older I've gotten. And now they're just, we go to a lot of funerals these days. I'm 65 and my husband's 74. So it's that time of, we've both lost both sets of parents by now, and we've watched people lose children, and I think that the Mass addresses that over and over again.
Let's talk about the celebration of the Eucharist itself, which is, we call it the source and summit of the Christian life in the Catholic Church, but it's kind of what the Mass is leading up to, that we celebrate on Sunday. But we have this reality at the center of it, which is very complex, which is the transformation of bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. And this is a very difficult concept to try to pin down. But when you reflect on it, on what's really taking place, how do you understand it? Or if you have to explain it, I know that you're very close to your grandkids, for example. How do you explain it to them, this complex thing that's happening, this mystery that's happening?
Sure, and I think, well, especially, for example, having little kids in church, and the first time they hear the words, this is my blood, drink this. I've had them look at me like, what? They know that there's something very mysterious about that, and they want to know how I explain it to them. So one of the things that I point them to right away is the whole image of Christ and Moses and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration, and how suddenly the disciples that are there are given this glimpse of what the glorified body of Christ is going to be, and that clearly the resurrected and ascended Christ does not have a fleshly body. We're not cannibals because we're Catholics, So that's kind of primary. The other thing I always go back to is the vision of God providing manna for the wandering Israelites in the desert. And, they're out there for 40 years, they're hungry and they're crabby about it, and they ask for help, and here comes this beautiful daily offering. Don't pick up any more than you're going to need, because it's going to be there again tomorrow. So I look at I'm still not at the heart of your question yet, is how those things get transformed. But one way I talk about it with my grandkids is they love my bread, my homemade bread, and I've taught all of them how to do it from the time they were really small. They've helped me make it. And they've seen the transformation from a little bowl of dry yeast and water, you know, and some grains that you mix together into this delicious hot loaf of bread that they put honey on and eat. That in and of itself is a kind of miracle. C.S. Lewis would call that a natural miracle.
Right.
We also make wine, and so they've been part of the wine-making process. So those are the two elements in the Eucharist. If those things can be transformed in this kind of ordinary miracle, I have no problem believing that it can be spiritually transformed also.
What about recovering this sense of mystery? This is something that's very prevalent, obviously, in the celebration of a Christian life, that you're constantly, these symbols, these gestures are put in front of you, and you can kind of understand them, but you also kind of not. And I know in your book you talk about, you know, it's not really easy in our culture to understand this concept of mystery, but you are very much for recovering that.
Yeah, and I think it's sad that we've got something I call scientism, which isn't the same as science. I think scientism is the belief that that's all there is. And
like what you can prove scientifically.
Exactly,
Okay.
which, you know, a lot of scientists don't believe that way. And it's kind of a leftover 19th century view, a very mechanistic view of how things work. And I know a lot of people who stay away from church and faith because they just can't get past that hang-up. Even though nowadays with quantum physics, we know we're getting into the realm of mystery all over again. I think just the openness to there being realities behind what we can see, invisible realities behind what we can see physically, it opens up this whole new realm for us. It opens up a realm of meaning that we can't get in a kind of horizontal plane, you know, where it's all about what's happening on the physical level. And so walking into a church for me, into the Mass for me, is one of the few places, and maybe the only place left in contemporary Western culture, where we're re-entering that ancient world where this was the air we breathed, you know. And it's foreign territory to us now. And it's, to me, just tremendously exciting to be able to re-engage with that.
Absolutely, and draw, you know, a line all the way back, you know, through all the people that have celebrated and lived all the way back to Jesus. Is a remarkable tradition there. We have a guest reviewer with us today. Mike Aquilina is a prolific author. One of his most famous books, The Mass of the Early Christians, so he knows all about this topic, the history of the Mass and the Eucharist. Mike.
I'm grateful to Paula Huston for writing One Ordinary Sunday, a meditation on the mystery of the Mass. She may be examining an ordinary Mass, but she's bringing an extraordinary set of eyes to the task. What she's practicing is an ancient art called mystagogy. It comes from a Greek word meaning teaching about the mysteries. The great masters of this art were St. Cyril of Jerusalem and Ambrose of Milan. Witnesses report that their 4th century congregations erupted into applause as those men preached their message. Well, I'm here to applaud Paula Huston and her most unusual book. You see, even in our own day, the task of mystagogy is usually carried out by the clergy. And I love the clergy. Their work is essential to the liturgy, but their role at Mass is essentially different from mine. Paula Huston gets that. She's a laywoman, so she sees the Mass from my side of the altar, where she sits with families and stragglers and people just hanging on. And she sees the Mass as something fresh and new. She's an adult convert to the faith. She didn't grow up with the Mass as I did. It's something she discovered, like a treasure hidden for centuries. So she helps me to see what's different and special about this very ordinary thing I celebrate every Sunday. Ms. Huston is a novelist by trade, and to her task of opening up the mysteries, she brings a novelist's sense of drama and descriptive power. In this book, she has made something beautiful for God and for us.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. Well, Paula, has the Mass played a role in your friendships with some of the church fathers who you talk about in the book, Cyril of Jerusalem, for example, or Justin Martyr?
People who lived in about 150 AD, right after, very close really to the crucifixion. I think one of the things that struck me the most about them was that the church was still in the process of being figured out. There were these huge questions out there about what was the nature of Christ? Who was this person? What did he mean when he told us to do these things? And so their calling was really difficult. And among themselves, they had to take stands that were unpopular, sometimes got them in trouble. So I see them as people of great integrity and great courage. And I think that they have something very important to say to us today. We're in a whole different realm than they were, but we're still facing some of, particularly the church in the United States right now is somewhat split. We're facing some of these old questions again. And we need voices like theirs. And I feel their presence when I'm in Mass because I am a great believer in the doctrine of the mystical body. I think that they are still with us. The Mass itself takes place in what I call in the book Kairos time, which means we're both in the past, it's happening while we're in the present, while it's happening, and we're flowing right into the future. So I feel their presence as the cloud of witnesses while I'm in Mass.
Yeah, the doctrine, the communion of saints is
the communion of saints.
Great tradition of the Catholic Church.
Oh, absolutely,
for sure.
yeah.
We have to take one more break, but when we come back, some concluding remarks from Paula Huston. Please stay with us. One Ordinary Sunday, a meditation on the mystery of the Mass, is published by Ave Maria Press and is available for purchase at avemariapress.com and at Ben McNally Books in Toronto.
This book is dedicated to Father Kenneth James Brown, also known as Father Ken, who was a longtime personal friend and colleague at the university in the English department before he finally responded to a call to the priesthood when he was over 50. And he is the pastor of the church that I'm writing about in this book. At the core of the Mass is this recognition of our human condition. At the core of the Mass is this confrontation with death. At the core is our answer to Moses' either-or ultimatum at Moab. I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Choose life. To celebrate the Mass in a state of composure and faith is to automatically choose life. And this, I believe too, though so often I'm not in a state of composure or even fully on board faith when I enter the doors of the church.
Paula, I want to ask you about a theme that runs through your book, which is that Mass is not a private event, that this is a community event, that being a Catholic is a communal thing, and there's so many different elements and symbols and gestures within the Mass, built into the Mass itself, that are constantly reminding us about that. But tell me a little bit about that, how important this communal element of the Eucharist is.
Well, it's, they're both symbols of it and words that describe it all the way through. And I know that it can be easy because the Catholic Church doesn't place a lot of emphasis on creating fellowship. There aren't these events set up for people and name tags and things like that. Right. And so you can go to church for a long time and not even know the names of the people around you. But when you listen to the words of, for example, the great Eucharistic prayer, it brings us back to the fact over and over again that we are one, we're meant to be one. The words of consecration, take this all of you. Even the processions, the coming in procession, the bringing up of the gifts during the offertory, the recessional, those are all, back in the ancient days, the entire congregation would be marching up together. They would be bringing the elements of the Mass or gifts for the poor. And so what we're seeing are the vestiges of highly communal events. And knowing the history of that helps bring that more alive for me.
Yeah, easy to forget, but it's so important for Catholics to be conscious of that.
Yeah.
And one more question for you before we wrap here, and that's about what happens after the Mass. I mean, you talk a lot about in the book, obviously, about participating in the Mass, but what about the other 6 days of the week? How has your reflection on the Mass affected the rest of your life?
Well, those words kind of ring in your ears in the final blessing, go in peace to love and serve the Lord, and we say thanks be to God, you know. We go out the door, I always feel like I'm going out of this cloud of love billowing out, and I have found that it's, over the years, I mean this took a long time, it has seemingly made me more permeable, that I'm kind of automatically more open to what's happening with people around me. I'm more sensitive when I see loneliness in people's eyes, or a kind of hopelessness or deadness, and I find myself smiling a lot at strangers. And you know, there's not big acts, but I really feel, especially in our day and age where there's a lot of hostility and anger out there in society, that small acts of kindness are my way of bringing the Mass into the world, you know, and trying to model that kind of compassion that Christ showed for the people around him.
Thank you very much, Paula.
You're welcome.
The book is One Ordinary Sunday, a meditation on the mystery of the Mass by Paula Huston. You can get it right here at Ben McNally Books in Toronto, or online from our good friends at Ave Maria Press, avemariapress.com. Paula is a novelist and spiritual writer and a Camaldolese Benedictine Oblate. She's the author of The Holy Way and Simplifying the Soul. You can learn more about Paula and her work at paulahuston.com. I want to thank our guest reviewer, Mike Aquilina. Mike has written or edited dozens of books, including The Mass of the Early Christians, his most recent book, How the Choir Converted the World. Check out Mike's website, fathersofthechurch.com. And remember, if you'd like to see my video review of One Ordinary Sunday, visit our website, saltandlighttv.org/subjectmatters, and click on the episode with Paula. That's all the time we have for today. We'll see you again soon. Take care. Subject Matters with Sebastian Gomes is sponsored by the Cullen family. Our Salt and Light team works hard to bring you quality Catholic programming like Subject Matters. Please consider supporting our mission by making a donation today. Thank you for your generosity, and remember, our hope begins with you.